Thank you for joining the Eastside Freedom Library Afro-Asian Solidarity Conversation Series. My name is Yuichiro Onishi. I teach in the Department of African American and African Studies and Asian American Studies program at the University of Minnesota. I also chair the Department of African American and African Studies. In our series, we approach Afro-Asian solidarities in arts, social movements, history, and everyday life as a way of understanding how communities of care, cooperation, and struggles emerge in compelling, surprising, and unlikely ways. We also approach Afro-Asian solidarities as a way of shaping new social relations and futures, as well as creative energies and practices. Today's conversation features Dr. Alessandra Williams. We're calling it Loving Deeply, a conversation on Afro-Asian aesthetic authority. For those who participated in the inaugural conversation in Emma Sapong, I want to thank you for your support. If you have any suggestions or comments for future episodes, please let us know, or you can just drop a line in the comment box. I'm very happy to have Dr. Alessandra Williams in the conversation series. Dr. Williams is a dancer and scholar who is assistant professor of dance at Rutgers University-New Brunswick, and whose academic interests include dance and performance studies, Asian and African diaspora, transnational feminism, and queer of color theory. Having joined Minneapolis-based Ananya Dance Theatre to train in the company's Yorchhā technique in 2006, Williams has performed in, starting with the most recent production, Sutrajal in 2019, Chaturanga in 2018, Shamoli in 2017, Holidra in 2016, Roktim in 2015, Morichka in 2012, Ashesh Barsha in 2009, and finally Pipasha in 2007. Currently, she is co-editor alongside Ananya Chatterjea and Wilcox for their forthcoming book on transnational feminism and dance. In other publications, Williams is writing a book proposal on the choreography of David Rousseau's Reality Dance Company as a form of queer color practice. As Eugene V. Cota-Robles Fellow, Williams earned a Ph.D. and MA in Culture and Performance at UCLA, and through the Mellow Mays Undergraduate Fellowship, finished her BA with honors in American Studies and Dance at Macalester College. From 2018 to 19, Williams served as Inclusive Excellence Fellow in Women and Gender Studies and Theater and Dance at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. And from 2016 to 2017, taught as a visiting assistant professor in dance program of Carleton College. Originally from Minneapolis, Williams works as a community organizer led to receiving the 2010 Minnesota Grassroots Solutions Organizer of the Year Award. Thank you for joining the conversation, Alessandra.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you again. So I want to start with your journey, the personal journey, the process of coming into being as a dancer and artist. And if you could tell us about the genesis, does it go back, way back? What was your first dance language?
Oh my goodness. Thank you for that question. It does go way back. Certainly my work with Ananya Dance Theatre is at the center of my movement practice in this moment, in the future, and in the past. And I think that I came into Ananya Dance Theatre's work as a result of a history in movement theater, actually. And so when I was in high school at Southwest High School in Minneapolis, as a part of the International Baccalaureate program, I had an amazing theater teacher. His name is Chris Fisher. And for the first time in my life, I sort of felt like I was a part of this creative community. And so we have this student theater group called Unhinged, and we have this ability to create our own plays and theater, and I would sort of hire my own actors and actresses and write my own plays and have them be a part of it. And I have this capacity to tell my own story in a way that I hadn't had before, in terms of taking leadership and power over what I was experiencing in my community in Minneapolis and what I was understanding about my neighborhood, what I was understanding about what it meant to be a student at that time. And when I finished high school and finished what at the time was called the International Baccalaureate Diploma, my teacher, Chris Fisher, sort of as a part of my graduation, gave me this book. And at the time, I had not heard of this person, this feminist. And the book was called Talking Back, and it was written by Bell Hooks. And that was an amazing sort of moment for me because my art teacher, was not only recognizing it and acknowledging the power that the arts was playing in my life, but was also acknowledging that there was a certain type of work that I was doing, and it was rooted in Black feminism, and that I needed to start to claim that for myself, and I needed to start to do my own research so that I knew what I was doing and from where it came. Because I think sometimes when we're in school and we're doing cool things, we think that we're doing like this new thing. And there is something about it that is new. And at the same time, there are people who have come before us who have long pioneered that general type of work, and we need to acknowledge them. And so getting that book sort of started this new journey about what it means to do the arts as a Black feminist and to work through that language. And so I think that is sort of how I start to frame what it has meant for me to be in the arts, what it has meant to do work and to talk back, to sort of claim these narratives of this sort of voiceless and marginalized, being a part of that group, and to develop a theory and framework that's rooted in what has already been created and known by Black feminists.
You know, so this is, again, I didn't hear this part of this story or your journey and trajectory. But what stands out in the way you just told this process is how you are entering into space of art making, so broadly defined, but activating multiple modes of art making. So this space unhinged, you know, student run, student read, but you're doing everything. Plays, you know, performing, dancing, probably singing too, but also writing, yes. And then also probably reading too. And it's this kind of very messy but intricate, very interconnected space, multimodal. But then, I mean, I like the way you tell it with the specificity too, that I really relate to is sometimes a book has a singular sort of power and impact on you. You know, so for you, talking about bell hooks just has this kind of a paradigm shift, you know, I can't use that word actually. It's a major shift in the way you think about the world and your relationship to the world. And again, I could totally relate to that kind of experience. And it's real. The knowledge has that kind of an incredible power. And I think this, again, segues nicely into maybe your next phase in your coming into being as an artist and scholar of dance and performance. But I'm really interested in how you eventually found a path to Ananya Dance Theatre, which is an important part of your life, broadly defined, not as an individual, but also as an artist and a scholar. So I'm very interested how you found it, eventually what drew to that space, and what was the appeal?
Yes. Phew. I think uh, uh, again, I came to Ananya Dance Theater through this drive toward wanting to highlight experiences that are being marginalized through the arts. And so I actually was a student at Macalester College, and I was doing a couple different things. I had started this hip hop performance team on campus called Bodacious as a space for queer, Black, women of color, femmes of the sort of African diaspora and allies to come together and perform and dance on campus and to tell our stories of what it means to be on a sort of predominantly white, small liberal arts campus in St. Paul in that moment. And at the same time, I was a part of the Mellon-Mays undergraduate fellowship program, which at the time was coordinated by my mentor and teacher, Peter Radcliffe. And Peter took our group to the very first performances of Ananya Dance Theatre. And so we went to go and see Ananya Dance Theatre's Bond Meditation on Dream, and this was 2005. And I just remember being this student sitting in the seats, and I just had never seen anything like it before. I'm actively a part of this performance team on campus and leading it. I'm doing theater and dance studies alongside my American Studies major. And I had never seen anything like that. These women of color from all of these diverse backgrounds just dancing so intensely and powerfully and together and in their individuality. And I just remember, the piece ended and the lights came on. And I was just like, what was that? I just had this feeling like, I don't know what that was. I don't know what I just saw. I just don't know what that was. But lucky for me, Ananya Chatterjea had just written her book, Budding Out, which focuses on choreographers Jawole Willa-Jolzahler and Chandralekha, and talks about the sort of value of women of color artists as being these cutting edge postmodern aesthetic, radical aesthetic practitioners. And so she came to the Mellon-Mays theories and histories class at Macalester as a guest lecturer. And I had like 1,000 questions. I had read and reread, the book, and I had 1,000 questions. And that just was a moment that I was so compelled by the work. And so by the time I came to see the second Ananya Dance Theatre piece, Durbar, in 2006, I had actually studied abroad in South Africa and took all of these classes in feminism. And I had to start to think about what kind of this diversity of being a femme, being a woman of color is, because there I was as this sort of African-American body in this sort of Black South African environment. And I had to start to understand Blackness in a very complex way in and of itself. And so for me, that gave me a new access point into Ananya Dance Theatre, to understanding what it means for diverse bodies of color to come together. And I saw Durbar in 2006, and it was like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. And the piece was focused on water and what it means for women of color to dance and perform together through Indian dance, through this Indian dance aesthetic, to talk about how difficult and challenging it is for women to access water across the globe, that labor is incredibly challenging. And at the same time, water, there's so many histories of oppression that are embedded within water. You know, my ancestors on my mother's side are African American, and we have to remember the Middle Passage and what it was like to cross the Atlantic and how many lives were lost. And so when I was watching that work, I think I became so connected because how could it be that an Indian dance aesthetic can help to tell my story as an African American person in the world? Like, how can this be? And that wasn't something that I had envisioned as possible. And so I needed to learn more. And so I joined immediately after that work in 2006 and started training in Yorchhā, training in classical Odissi dance, which is the form that Ananya Chatterjea began training in at age 5 with her guru and teacher, Sanjukta Panigrahi. And then she trains us in that practice that has been with her for so long, and then connects that with 2 other forms, the vinyasa style of yoga, so how we breathe through poses, and then a martial arts form as well, Chow. And so I started training in this intersection of forms that Ananya Chatterjea had created on these bodies of color like me in the work. And from there, got my Ph.D. from UCLA, in part studying the company's work and trying to understand what are the alliances that are happening through Indian dance. And certainly my own body as a Black body in this Indian dance aesthetic was foundational to the inspiration of wanting to explore Afro-Asian connections further.
Sorry, I want to go back to this Yorchhā as a foundational conceptual aesthetic, really kind of a concrete practice within Ananya Dance Theatre Company. And you just mentioned the different elements that make up this particular aesthetic form, and also a dance form and aesthetic orientation. And I think it's just really revealing about how you're engaging with this particular aesthetic form, all the while recognizing the drive towards solidarity as a women of color, this aesthetic and very intuitive drive, artistic, creative drive toward that solidarity, called, let's say, women of color, transnational feminist work. But then you're acutely cognizant, even as an observer of theater in early times of 2006 production, and how the discussion about water sort of conjure all sorts of memories and histories for you to make those connections, all the while, particularly around the Middle Passage and distinct, the Black experience and African people's experiences in the diaspora. But you're also cognizant of how Ananya's work and production, the space, allows for the individualities that you say, individualities, particular spaces, particular history experience as a woman of color. But somehow these two kind of collide and interact to render something potentially universal or ecumenical. But now I wanted to shift a little bit more to you as a performer in that space, from the viewer, of the production, to really performer, because you've been performing with the company consistently for now, 2015 or so, or 14. So question is, how do you bring your own body, your own self, your own grounding to enable this Afro-Asian collaborative spaces and make that space and practice productive? So I want to hear more about, yeah, I want to just more hear about how you embody now as a practitioner in that space.
That's such a good question, Yuich. I really think it starts with good leadership and good leadership that is grounded in concrete intersectional framing. And so Ananya Chatterjea, as our leader, is deeply aware of our bodies, okay? And what kinds of perspectives exist about our bodies in the world, and what kinds of histories are connected to our bodies, and what kinds of experiences. And so, for example, the most recent sort of series, because Ananya Dance Theatre works in these series. So we don't sort of have this one dance, but one dance that's 60, not even 60, like 2 hours, 90 minutes to 2 hours long, is connected to several other dances of that same length. And so we have this series called Work Women Do that Ananya envisioned from 2014 to 2018. And so every single one of those 5 dances was about the essential labor of queer, femme, women of color around the world. And so here we have this conceptual framework that Ananya is creating that is incredibly broad. It's incredibly broad. And it's incredibly focused at the same time because we're talking about queer, femme, women of color. And so from that broad context, she's thinking about our bodies and sort of how we fit within that context. And so in the most recent work, Sutrajal, in the fall of 2019, Ananya had envisioned sort of this kind of guide that is helping to take the audience through this story that is held together by this symbol of the spider web, that we are all connected as queer femmes of color across the globe in some way, but we need a guide to guide us through that process. And so connected to how she's sort of thinking about that is all the aspects of the production. And so on stage, you see me sort of engaging with this poet, Tish Jones. And so that's a part of the work, is these connections between these particular Black bodies on stage. You also see me witnessing the performance as it's taking place on stage. So I'm in the background, and in the foreground, Ananya, for example, is dancing in a trio with Kealoha Ferreira and Renee Copeland. I'm also witnessing the birth of women of color on stage. So we have Kealoha and Alexandra Edie that are bringing life to this artist on stage, Lychee. And so I'm witnessing this work, and I'm also dancing in the ensemble. At the end of the work, my body is also on the line. I don't get to just stand back and look and gaze as a voyeur at these people. I have to step into this work and be in this work and sweat and do that labor as well. And so that role, was really important because as Ananya Dance Theatre, the Chandram Institute for Performance and Social Justice is located in St. Paul at the site of what was this historic Arnella's nightclub for Black communities to come together. And that nightclub is no more, but that was a very important gathering space that was led and created and held together by Black women of color labor. And so by, again, thinking about our bodies and what it means under this larger framework, Ananya is actually able to pay tribute to the heroes and sort of ancestors in our community through that specificity and through that large framework.
Well, I didn't know how, intentional. From the physical space and of the company to, intricacies of layering within the performance, relationships, juxtapositions. Nobody's static at all. Nobody's static. And what I like about it is that, again, the Yorchhā is the in many ways the contact area zone allows. It seems like Yorchhā is the tool. Everything it's through Yorchhā that people come together, but then differences are maintained and engaged by performers and dancers. And I really like that kind of tension that's constantly at play, the solidarity, unity, and differences, different experiences, multiple voices. I think that's one of the key hallmark, it seems to me, in that you found, in many ways, you found a home in that space. Yeah. But now I wanna shift a little bit, really into your academic work, and you have. I've had a fortune of looking at your forthcoming essay on relationship between Laurie Carlos and Ananya Chatterjea's Ananya Dance Theatre, and her participation and engagement with this very specific space. And you have some slides to share, but I wanted to, and then also audio-visual piece, so that people can see the intricacies at work that we're about to kind of dig deep into. But this production is the 2010 production called Koi, Decay. And I want to read out loud, if I can pull out the document here, the description of this particular production, 2010 production called Koi. And our goal here is to really think about Laurie Carlos, and you can maybe introduce her bio a little bit later, and her artistic, creative relationship on the stage, but also outside of the stage too, between Ananya Chatterjea and then Carlos. And anyway, so I'm going to read this description just out loud, because it's very, very, actually kind of very powerful, and then sets the context. So the Koi, in Koi, decay, and Koi is a Bengali word for decay, hence the Koi and decay juxtaposition. The company uses a potent metaphor, mud, as in dirt that sticks to skin, to explore the afterlives of African, Asian, and other women of color forced to relocate or evacuate from their homelands. The piece investigates how women have worked through multiple and repeated histories of dislocation, relocation, evacuation, and violence in the name of tradition. Koi is the first work in a new 4-part investigation into violence, trauma, resistance, and empowerment experienced by communities of color, using the elements of mud, gold, oil, and water as metaphor. And again, you're exploring specific collaboration, Afro-Asian collaboration between Laurie Carlos and Ananya Chatterjea. I didn't know anything about Laurie Carlos, but Carlos was an incredibly versatile Black women artist, incredibly versatile. And she was an actor, performed in Broadway as Lady Blue in for color girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough by Entozaki Shange in 1976. She was part of the original cast. And Carlos was also a director, playwright, and poet. So let's do some analysis of their collaborative. And if you can let's turn to your slide presentation.
Okay.
Great. So you were in it too as a puppeteer?
No, not that.
Not this one. Oh, I see. No, not this one. I'm so sorry. That was the Morichka.
Okay.
That's right. That's right. Sorry. Yeah. So tell us about what you see and dynamism of that particular piece.
Yes. Yes. Well, I was really privileged to be able to work and perform with Ananya Dance Theatre in 2012 for Morichka Season of Mirage. And at that time, as a result of being there, Laurie Carlos and Ananya Chatterjea were collaborating. Okay, so by then, it's been several years because the piece that we just viewed that was 2 years prior to Morichica. So Ananya and Laurie Carlos have been co-collaborating, co-conceiving Ananya Dance Theatre productions for some years. And before that, right, Ananya and Laurie had collaborated together in Laurie Carlos's own works. Marion's Terrible Time of Joy is a work that was created by Laurie Carlos with Ananya as a part of the symbolism and metaphors of that work. And that was almost 10 years prior to their co-collaborating. I think it was 2003. And so they already had a practice of working together and collaborating together. Now, when I was there in 2012, what struck me is that, in fact, these two are not coming together because they have to be sort of this singular practice of women of color identity and politics and ideologies, that in fact, they're working together across their own diversities. And I had the opportunity to interview Laurie Carlos, who has now passed and left us. And she actually laid out quite clearly that she would never say that she worked with a women of color company. That's not a part of how she describes the work that she does. And that just confused me so, right? Because here Laurie Carlos is working with Ananya Chatterjea, who is very clear that this is a company that is focused on women of color stories, and Laurie Carlos is a part of the original cast for Colored Girls that is grounded in African diaspora femme stories and experiences. Laurie Carlos's own plays have been theorized by Omi Oshun, Joni L. Jones, in terms of how they highlight a female ancestor, for example, with her play White Chocolate for My Father. So what is Laurie Carlos talking about? And so I needed to understand that and what it means for these two artists to come together and work together and to make, like what we've just seen, work together. And so part of it is in this video, Alive, right? That Ananya is embodying Yorchhā technique. And at the same time, Laurie Carlos is embodying her own technique. And so on stage, we have these two techniques living together, Yorchhā with Ananya and what's called the theatrical jazz aesthetic with Laurie Carlos. And the theatrical jazz aesthetic is all about improvisation, with sound, with movement, and with narrative. So we know from what we've seen that doesn't exist without gesture, this gestural vocabulary. And so for me, what I came to understand that is, in fact, that difference, that disagreement can exist in the same place and be placed on stage in the same place. And even when we're talking about women of color, that's not this homogeneous, singular monolith by any means, It is complexity, diversity. And so we have to acknowledge that. And there's something that Laurie Carlos said in the interview, which is, I love Ananya deeply. And because I love Ananya deeply, our differences have to coexist on stage. And so love is about difference, it's about disagreement, and beauty, complexity comes out of disagreement.
No, that's really profound. Actually, as I was listening to you, I started to actually now understand the title, why you titled the talk as you did. And I didn't ask you at the outset, but now I know. So thank you for that clarification. loving deeply. So love as a concept, you're right, is incredibly complex one. It's vexed but it's just it exists in its spaces to actually not fight through, but sort of struggle over differences. And when I was reading your work, it's just really was a confounding to me that Laurie Carlos kind of categorically rejected women of color as a form of identification. But yet, I mean, there's this the power that between the two that was so evident and palpable. So, and your essay really mapped that out, the dynamism. But now I know that love as an aesthetic and as a powerful aesthetic form that brought these two very distinct forms together, jazz improvisation technique and Ananya's Yorchhā. It's really powerful. People should really look at that four-part series and right, all four, Laurie is in it, right? Laurie Carlos?
Yes.
Yeah.
In 2010, 20,
yeah.
Wait, 2009.
Yeah.
Wait, yeah, 2009, 2010, 20, wait, no, 2010, 2011, 2012.
Yeah, right. No, that's really amazing. Yeah, if you have a chance to look at Ananya's website too, it's very, very good. It has all the nice synopsis overviews of her production. Her ensemble is showcased really well, and there's some video clips as well that introduces her distinct dance form called Yorchhā, which I've now know what it is, and that it sits at the core of everything that she does, which I didn't know. So, so I've learned a great. So I really encourage all of you to take a look at this, the website. Finally, the last question I really want to turn to you is, what are you currently working on above and these are beyond Ananya's work, your work with Ananya Dance Theatre? Very interested in your work generally.
Yes.
So yeah, I know you have some slides to share too.
I do.
Okay.
A little introduction to what we're about to see. It's called a ritual. And so this has been choreographed by me, and the type of movement is Yorchhā. And so even as I do work sort of solo choreographed, if we want to call it that, the movement and the training is still rooted in Ananya Dance Theater's technique. And so I think that this is kind of an interesting moment where it's not only me, but it's other artists as well. Alexandra Edie, Renee Copeland, Kealoha Ferreira. We actually did an evening performance together where we each had these solo pieces that we had choreographed in Yorchhā. And so what we're about to see, I also performed alongside my colleagues, because we're all now doing this work of solo choreographing and yet in Yorchhā technique. And so this is called a ritual.
That's wonderful. So this was performed in New Jersey?
That was actually from when I was at University of Wisconsin Whitewater.
Mm,
So performed there in spring 2019.
I see. I see. What was in the middle of, what was on the stage?
That was a sort of series of textiles and
Mm,
cloths, um, generally from uh, Western Southern Africa,
I see.
that I've collected over time. And I think part of what I was interested in is, again, intersectionality. And so we're always rooted in race, gender, sexuality, religion, class, that these are interlocking forms of oppression. And so when I'm doing Yorchhā, I'm doing it in my body. And so, how can I be rooted in the layers of my own history as the child of an African American mother out of Louisiana, out of the segregated Jim Crow South, and a father from Liberia, West Africa, so a West African immigrant who came to the United States. And so embodying those realms and my own form of transnationalism in my own body as I do this work. And how can that be a ritual beyond the self, but with audience members and my witnesses, that we're breathing through this together.
Wow, I see. That's wonderful. Well, I just wanted to wrap this up together, and it was really revelatory in so many ways. Your coming into being as an artist from the inception through your engagement with Ananya Dance Company. And you and I, for full disclosure, have so much in common in terms of our shared, academic interest. We both are invested in the study of Afro-Asian solidarity in different ways, and then we do share sort of a general understanding of solidarity as existing in dynamic ways with differences in different histories and experiences, and in a sort of a broader context of all the systems interlocking, like you say, systems of oppression and domination. But we're always looking to locate those spaces, however short-lived, the spaces that seem to go beyond and transcend those differences in a very searching way. But anyway, you do it in the context of dance and performance. I mean, I do it in a very different, in this very straightforward academic way. But trying to understand what I'm interested in through aesthetics is just, it's a very, I have to use different part of my brain, but it does trigger something that allows us to touch and feel something that we don't typically do if you're sort of in a specific space. But so I want to really thank you for opening up that door for me and others to understand aesthetic authority, Afro-Asian aesthetic authority. So
Thank you.
thank
And I
you.
want to thank you as well for how you embody Afro-Asian solidarity, even in making this interview. I mean, the type of attention that you paid to this work
Mhm.
is so incredible. I mean, from setting up a phone call with me to reading my forthcoming essay to doing a sort of pre-conversation on Zoom to ask me further questions about the work, the level of attention and inquiry and interest and value that you paid to this work, I think is something that for me as an emerging scholar, that I'm really going to hold on to and that I demonstrate to in how I work. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Alessandra. I really do appreciate that. Okay,